At approximately 2:47 a.m. local time on June 13, 2025, explosions rocked key infrastructure sites across central and western Iran. The first images, shaky and grainy, emerged from civilian smartphones. Massive fireballs illuminating the dark skies over Isfahan, Shiraz, and Bandar Abbas. Within minutes, news agencies worldwide were buzzing with reports that Israel had launched a multi-pronged strike against Iranian military assets. The Israeli government, as is standard in such operations, initially offered no public comment, but international observers, intelligence, leaks, and subsequent satellite imagery left little doubt. Israel had indeed attacked Iran. The targets appeared to be strategic: nuclear development sites, military air bases, missile storage facilities, and key command centers. Reports from Iranian state media spoke of widespread damage and loss of life, although exact figures remained unclear in the fog of war. Meanwhile, Iran's air defense systems, though partially activated, appeared to have been overwhelmed in the first wave. Video showed Iranian anti-aircraft batteries firing into empty skies, struggling to counter the precision and scale of the assault. This attack marked a severe escalation in a conflict that had simmered for decades. For years, Israel had warned about Iran's nuclear ambitions, seeing a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat. Diplomacy had bought time, but not trust. Tensions flared over the years with cyber attacks, assassinations of nuclear scientists, and sabotage missions, all widely attributed to Israeli intelligence. But nothing had approached the magnitude of what took place on June 13. Iran's response was immediate and predictable. Just hours after the strikes, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei appeared on state television, vowing a devastating retaliation. He accused Israel of war crimes and called upon allies across the region to stand in defense of Iran's sovereignty. Missiles were fired from Iranian territory toward the Golan Heights and parts of northern Israel. Although Israel's Iron Dome and David S. Sling defense systems intercepted most of the incoming projectiles, a few managed to cause minor structural damage. In Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, air raid sirens blared, and residents fled to bomb shelters for the first time in months. In Washington, D.C., the Biden administration found itself thrust into a geopolitical firestorm. Having spent the past 2 years trying to renegotiate nuclear agreements with Iran while maintaining a strategic alliance with Israel, the United States now stood at a precarious crossroads. President Biden, awakened in the early hours of the morning, immediately convened his national security team. A statement was issued later that day, calling for restraint from all parties and warning that further escalation would jeopardize regional and global stability. Yet privately, officials grappled with the harsh reality that America's two conflicting priorities, preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and avoiding another Middle Eastern war, had just collided in the halls of the Pentagon. The mood was tense, but not entirely shocked. U.S. intelligence had reportedly picked up signs of Israeli preparations in the weeks leading up to the strike. Movement of Israeli aircraft, satellite observations of increased activity at Israeli airbase, and encrypted chatter suggested something was coming, though the exact target and timing had remained unclear. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin ordered the repositioning of naval assets closer to the Strait of Hormuz, elevated the readiness level of CENTCOM forces stationed in the region. The U.S. wasn't directly involved, but the risk of being dragged into a broader conflict was undeniable. Around the world, reactions poured in. The European Union condemned the escalation, urging immediate ceasefire talks. China, with economic interests across the Middle East, expressed deep concern and offered to mediate between the two sides. Russia, still embroiled in its own global tensions, framed the attack as another example of Western-backed aggression and offered Iran intelligence and logistical support. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, but, as expected, failed to pass any meaningful resolution due to sharp divisions among permanent members. In Israel, Prime Minister Eli Jair addressed the nation that evening in a solemn televised speech. He confirmed that Israeli forces had carried out defensive precision strikes against Iranian nuclear and military facilities, citing irrefutable evidence that Iran was within weeks of achieving nuclear breakout capability. He did not mention U.S. coordination, but sources within Israeli intelligence suggested Washington was briefed just hours before the operation commenced. The Prime Minister's message was clear. Israel had acted out of necessity, not desire. "We will not wait for a second Holocaust," he said, referencing both history and Israel's enduring national security doctrine, that it must never allow itself to be existentially threatened again. Inside Iran, the situation turned volatile. Anti-Israeli sentiment surged, but there was also a palpable sense of vulnerability. Iranian citizens took to the streets, some in defiance of the regime, others in nationalistic support. Power outages affected large parts of the country, and hospitals were overwhelmed with the wounded. Iranian officials claimed that several dozen civilians had died in the attacks, though independent verification was difficult amid restricted media access. Cyber attacks targeted Iranian banking systems and communication networks, a parallel front of the conflict that bore all the hallmarks of Israeli cyber warfare units. The shadow war between the two nations had finally come into the light. In Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria, proxy groups aligned with Iran began mobilizing. Hezbollah launched a series of short-range rockets into northern Israel, triggering retaliatory Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon. In Iraq, militias threatened American troops stationed at joint bases, prompting the Pentagon to reinforce security and accelerate withdrawal plans. The risk of a regional wildfire loomed large. Back in the United States, public opinion was sharply divided. Some conservative voices praised Israel's decisiveness, framing it as a bold stand against tyranny. Others, especially among progressive and anti-war groups, condemned the attack as reckless, fearing it would plunge the region into chaos and suck the U.S. into yet another costly conflict. Cable news shows ran continuous coverage. Experts debated legality, morality, and strategic foresight, and presidential candidates began recalibrating their foreign policy platforms in real time. Markets responded with predictable volatility. Oil prices spiked by nearly 20% overnight, reaching levels not seen since the early 2020s. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of global oil passes, became a flashpoint. Shipping companies rerouted tankers, and insurance premiums skyrocketed. Wall Street braced for prolonged instability. Tech stocks dipped, defense contractors surged, and gold became the safe haven of the hour. Social media became a battleground of its own. Disinformation campaigns, bot activity, and state-sponsored propaganda flooded platforms like X, Facebook, and TikTok. Narratives competed with ferocity, some amplifying Iranian suffering, others championing Israeli preemptive strategy. Meanwhile, real people, in both Tel Aviv and Tehran, uploaded raw and emotional videos showing the cost of war in human terms. Children crying in shelters, families digging through rubble, old men praying in broken mosques. By June 15th, diplomatic backchannels were ablaze. Qatar, Oman, and Turkey tried to mediate ceasefire talks, leveraging their unique relationships with both Iran and Israel. The United States sent an envoy to Geneva for indirect talks with Iranian diplomats, attempting to prevent further escalation. But mistrust ran deep. Iran demanded international condemnation and reparations. Israel warned that any retaliation would be met with even harsher force. Meanwhile, both nations remained on high alert, bracing for what could come next. American military bases in the Gulf region were put on DEFCON 3 status. B-52 bombers flew patrols over international waters. Drones monitored Iranian missile sites, and carrier groups patrolled the Arabian Sea. In Tel Aviv, the streets were eerily quiet, with most residents staying close to shelters. In Tehran, calls for martyrdom echoed from loudspeakers, and thousands volunteered for the Revolutionary Guard. This confrontation had no easy path forward. It was not a traditional war, nor a purely covert operation. It existed in the gray zones of 21st century warfare, a hybrid of kinetic strikes, cyber sabotage, and psychological influence. It was driven by ideology, history, and survival, and it played out under the shadow of nuclear ambition. For Israel, the operation was meant to delay, deter, and demonstrate strength, but it also risked uniting Iran's fractured political factions and rallying support for Iran. The attack was both a humiliation and a justification, a reason to accelerate its nuclear program in defiance. And for America, the consequences stretched far beyond the battlefield, already stretched by tensions with China, conflict in Eastern Europe, and domestic unrest. The U.S. now had to navigate a Middle East veering dangerously close to open war. By the end of the week, the world remained on edge. Ceasefire proposals circulated but bore little fruit. Diplomats met behind closed doors. Intelligence agencies worked overtime to assess the next move. And in the homes of millions, in Iran, Israel, America, and beyond, people prayed, hoped, and feared what tomorrow might bring. The events of June 13, 2025, had changed the calculus. The balance of deterrence was disrupted. The region's fragile stability was shattered. And while the bombs may have stopped falling for the moment, the aftershocks, political, military, and human, were only just beginning.